This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by global energy law firm Bracewell, LLP. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on natural gas, we're going to talk about liquefied natural gas, or LNG. Fred Hutchison, President and CEO of LNG Allies and of public relations consultant Franklin Hamilton, is going to describe the dynamics of the LNG sector and why its impacts on the U.S. and global economies and energy markets are so significant. Fred's led LNG Allies since 2014 and Franklin Hamilton since 2006. Before moving to LNG Allies, Fred was senior consultant with Cornerstone Government Affairs, was a senior VP with public relations firm Fleischman Hillard, and served as legislative assistant on the environment to legendary Kentucky Senator Frank Church. Fred, let's start with the basics. What is liquefied natural gas, or LNG? What is its importance in the overall fuel mix? And why is the export of it such an important and highly debated question?
Well, Herman, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today and to answer these questions. Natural gas is primarily composed of methane. Methane is an amazing compound. It is not only a very high calorie fuel. It is a substance that can be used in the manufacture of chemicals, fertilizers. It has enormous uses in the industrial, electric power, and heating sectors. It is the currently in the United States represents over 40% of our electricity mix. Liquefied natural gas is simply a process whereby gas at atmospheric pressure is cooled and compressed until its volume is reduced by 600 times. So it is available then to be transported internationally by big shipping vessels. If it were simply at the gas level, it wouldn't be economically practical to do that. The United States is now the world's largest LNG producer. We're the global natural gas producer, and in 2023 we surpassed Qatar, and Australia is the world's leading exporter. Um, it is a great time to be in the business. LNG is in demand globally, and I'm sure we're going to have a great discussion about this.
Um, and I want to talk about exports. So let me ask this question, Fred. We recently saw in December and January two key reports about LNG exports and their effect on all kinds of things, but they're somewhat conflicting. One's from the Department of Energy, and the other one is from S&P Global, headed up by Dan Yergin. The reporting was headed up by Dan Yergin, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. Um, what do those reports conclude about the impact of LNG exports on U.S. natural gas prices? We'll talk about other impacts in a minute, but just how is that going to? What do they say about the effect on here U.S. domestic prices? And the reason I ask that is because that can affect so many things in industry, but it can affect consumers' electricity and heating prices.
Well, Herman, this has been a source of, it's been a question mark. It's been a little source of controversy since it was first proposed to export natural gas by LNG from the United States back about 2010. We are now 9 full years into operating experience. Currently, LNG exports represent something like 12 to 14% of U.S. consumption, total consumption of dry natural gas. And I can tell you that the studies, we'll talk about the studies in a second, but let's just talk about the historical data because, forecasts are just forecasts, and especially
Right.
forecasts that rely on demand and supply balances to sort of derive some price projection. It's very difficult to do. Natural gas is a fuel. Most of it's consumed in the northern hemisphere, heavy use in the winter, growing use in the summer for air conditioning. And so for 9 years, we have evidence as the full ramp up of LNG exports has occurred, and there was no correlation between a rise in U.S. LNG exports and domestic prices. In fact, prices fell over that particular period of time. And so there's been no historical correlation. The Department of Energy has done several studies on the economic benefits of LNG, and they looked at the potential price impacts. And the studies went back to 2012, I believe, and have been updated a couple of times, most recently in the study you referenced in 2024. Well, even that study indicated that under almost an unlimited export scenario, that the price effects on the United States would be pretty minimal. They talked about a slight rise over 25 years, something on the order of maybe 25%. So it's maybe a percentage point a year. But it's very difficult, honestly, to make those kinds of projections. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, speaking of the study that Dan Jurgen led from S&P Global, the industry, through the Chamber of Commerce, asked Jurgen and his team to do a real robust analysis and looked at a bunch of things. One of which was domestic price impacts, another of which was the global climate effects, and some other things. And that study really concluded, as all previous studies sponsored by the DOE prior to 24, really indicated that the likely price impacts were minimal. Now, what we saw when the study was released in the final days of the Biden administration back in December of 2024, we saw then Secretary Granholm characterize that study in a 3 or 4 page summary document that she released that really tried to put a particular spin on the results of that. And one of the things that we observed as we looked at it sort of the day after was that when you went through the study, her summary didn't really seem like it was based on the conclusions that were in the study. S&P has reaffirmed that, and DOE had thousands of comments on this study. I understand that as we're having this conversation on the 1st of May, that the DOE has worked its way through the comments. The comment period closed about 40 days ago. They've worked their way through the comments and are likely to have summarized those and to publish some of their response. And I think we will see that the publication of that really indicates that LNG exports are clearly in the public interest of the citizens of the United States of America.
This episode is brought to you by the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell, where law, policy, and strategic communications intersect to help clients navigate what's next. At Bracewell, we know energy. It's the industry we serve, the power behind big ideas, and the force we bring to every challenge. For nearly 80 years, our firm has helped industry leaders tackle high-stakes challenges with creativity, precision, and results. Bracewell's DC-based policy resolution group helps clients anticipate what's coming so they can shape what's possible, from chaos to clarity. Learn more at bracewell.com/PRG.
Just to clarify, we didn't really specify at the beginning that the process you described so clearly about compressing, lowering the temperature and compressing natural gas into liquid form makes that export possible. And so part of the controversy, I guess, is over the building of new, pretty expensive facilities to do that. And I'm not going to get into that question, but the DOE and S&P Global reports, they had somewhat different perspectives on how LNG exports are going to affect and be affected by global demand for natural gas. And that continues to be not, number one, very important to the whole energy sector, but also increasingly uncertain. We hear the export of LNG discussed in the context of the war in Ukraine. And just this week, we began hearing questions raised about whether the need for our LNG is going to support Europe in its support of Ukraine, or whether Europe will want to go back to Russian gas because they have all that existing infrastructure to import it. And that just seems to add to the uncertainty. Can you help us understand these points and what this impact is going to be for the U.S. From all these factors?
Well, look, the future is notorious to predict. But let me just say this, that our own view is that the world is in a period of transition to lower carbon fuel sources. The earliest stages of that transition will involve, as they have in the United States, the decrease in the use of coal and an increase of renewables and natural gas in combination with energy efficiency. And that's the model that has led the United States to lead the world in overall, by measured on a metric ton basis, to lead the world in carbon emission reductions. It's been strong growth in renewables, strong growth in gas, and continuing focus on energy efficiency wherever that's possible. The rest of the world is still headed in that direction. We are seeing a number of countries that are moving away from nuclear, a number of other countries that are interested in nuclear. We saw the recent situation that happened on the Iberian Peninsula, where there was several days very high reliance on the renewables that do such a great job of producing indigenous power in Spain and Portugal. But we saw what might well be a pattern of oscillation that because there wasn't enough spinning inertia in the generators that can keep going even if the power kind of fluctuates, that it led to the blackout. And so until we get to a point where battery storage or some other sort of form of energy storage is prevalent and able to handle all of the needs of a system, gas is going to be the backup choice, the backup fuel of choice. Now, what we are seeing is, I think, let's talk about Europe for a minute. You asked that question. Let's talk about Europe.
Yeah.
Look, Europe, after Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, What we saw was, and well, even leading up to that, in the winter, in the fall and winter of 2021 and 22, we saw a lot of panic buying of in Europe, and prices for gas and electricity and every other fuel, reached really record
Yeah.
levels at that particular
Yep.
point. And what we saw is that in the following winter, so the winter of 2023 and the winter of 2022 and 23 and the winter of 2023 and 24 were the two warmest winters on record in Europe. But even with that, they had elevated prices and demand destruction. They lost a lot of industrial production. They may have permanently lost upwards of 10% of their capacity, just based on those energy disruptions. So they dodged a bullet with some warm weather. People turned down their thermostats, saved energy. There was demand destruction. This has really caused the new European Commission in Brussels and their new parliament to really think hard about what they want to have in the future. Do they want to stick with the path they've been on? Or do they want to reevaluate what they need to protect their industrial base? And so we see a lot of reconsideration of that. Is it possible that gas is going to flatten or decline? Sure. Is it equally possible if Europe wants to maintain not only its competitiveness, but stay up with the United States as we get to, the hyperscale, the demand of the hyperscalers and these big data centers and these big artificial intelligence centers, then they're going to need more power and they're going to need it. Sure, they can continue to increase their renewables, but they'll need some backstop for that. So it's equally possible, in our view, that the gas demand in Europe will go up. But globally, I think everybody expects gas to have a great couple of decades ahead. Look, there are specific parts of the world, in South Asia in particular, with India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia with the developing
Yeah.
economies. They're very price sensitive. So a lot of that depends on what happens with the price of gas. So
But and the truth is that the oil and gas, natural gas industries are very used to. You say that all these things with such calmness and such certainty, or not certainty, but assurance. Let me say it that way. And it's because these sectors always are dealing with this onslaught of factors that could go one way, could go the other way. The old joke about there's no use of an economist with only one hand, because everything is in economics is got to be on this hand and that hand. Um, but I want to move on. We don't have much time left, Fred.
sure.
So I do want to mention you've given me the opportunity by bringing up the Iberian Peninsula power outage. One thing that I have not seen in any of the discussions, and it clearly, not clearly, it does look like there was some kind of oscillation in the transmission process that caused that. Nobody really knows exactly where it started, but it does seem to have involved inertia, and that
Mhm.
spinning power plants do provide inertia. But I did a lot. I have been looking forward to being able to mention this on a podcast, Fred. So you'll have to bear with me. I did a lot of reporting about, first by the North American Electricity Reliability Council and others in the national labs to provide a way for renewables to guard against losses of inertia. And that's already being included in some of the more dynamic regions of the US. And I think that's something I haven't seen mentioned in the reporting. So I wanted to mention that just in case it's of news to somebody. And I hope you'll let me leave that there, Fred. I don't mean to be argumentative necessarily, but I want to get on to this last question, which I think is really important. And you got into it a little bit just a few minutes ago. What are your, in other words, LNG allies, key federal and state policy concerns under this relatively new administration? And how do you think about, there's been this long-term concern about greenhouse gas emissions. Could you just tell us a little bit more about where you think this is all going and how policy might affect it?
Well, I'll do my best, Herman. I think that we're at a very interesting and important juncture for the industry. We really felt like in 3 of the 4 years, the past administration, we were focused exclusively on getting a return to the regular order in processing applications to build new U.S. LNG facilities or to extend the deadlines for the commencement of exports. Those issues have really been taken off the table by this administration. They returned to regular order. They've been promptly approving new export facilities. As I mentioned, they've moved through thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of comments on this study, and they're moving forward on in that space. FERC is down from 5 commissioners to 4 with Billy Phillips's retirement, but the 4 existing commissioners, 2 Dems and 2 Republicans, work closely together. FERC is adequately and quickly responding to some core challenges. So the regulatory process is on track. I think there are a few issues that we're working through with the administration, issues with respect to the cost of materials. Look, we've just coming through an inflationary period of time where costs have been up. We've got a lot of facilities. We've got 8 facilities shipping LNG currently, 4 more under construction, and 4 or 5 that are very close to a final investment decision. All those be built in the United States. All of them will require a lot of labor. So we are keeping an eye on how things work out with regard to the tariffs and the trade issues. We've taken the lead in urging both the United States and the European Union, for example, to come together on a trade deal. Europe has expressed an interest in buying more U.S. LNG. Trump administration has expressed an interest in helping to facilitate that. We think that could come with a couple of sweeteners. One that would help the EU be assured of continued U.S. deliveries in the future, and another which would grant the U.S. equivalency to the EU rules on methane and their EU methane regulation. So we're hopeful that that's going to reach a conclusion. Been some discussion in the last few days about a 301 tariff investigation that was led by the U.S. Trade Representative into the Chinese shipbuilding. One of the outcomes of that is potentially some requirements that some U.S. LNG exports in the near future and in the long term need to be on U.S. built and U.S. flagged ships. Difficulty with that is we don't currently have that capability in the United States, and it would probably
Yeah.
take 5 or 6 years to get up to that. But those are things that we're working through. This administration couldn't be more cooperative. I heard Secretary Wright in yesterday's cabinet meeting tell the president that U.S. LNG exports are currently our number 2 leading export sector, soon to be number 1. So we're sure that the rest of this term will be positive overall for the U.S. LNG export industry.
Okay. Um, Lots more to talk about, Fred, but we're out of time.
Sure.
I want to thank you so much. My guest has been LNG Allies President and CEO Fred Hutchison, and he's given us some wonderful insights into the dynamics of the absolutely fascinating LNG sector and the natural gas industry, and why they have such significant impacts on the U.S. and global economies and energy markets. I also want to thank our sponsor, Bracewell LLP. And as always, I want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.